Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry McVenis, the President and CEO of RTCA. Greetings from our nation's capital and welcome to all of you to what is now our 9th in a series of webinars we're calling Aviation Technology Connect. We're pleased to have created this series via this platform to hear from a variety of aviation industry leaders on a broad spectrum of topics that will educate you, further inspire you in your profession, and perhaps even evolve your thinking as to where the industry is today, as well as where it's going in the future. This webinar series continues to be very successful, exceeding all of our expectations here at RTCA. We have attracted an international audience of upwards of 400 people tuning in each month, not only from here in the United States, but also from Canada, countries across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, South America, Australia, and New Zealand. We've heard from a broad spectrum of leaders representing our great aviation industry, including regulators and others from the industry as well. And we believe that today's webinar is going to be equally exciting and informative. Now, these previous webinars have been recorded, as is this one. So if you want to go back and listen to any of our previous webinars, you can find those recordings on the RTCA YouTube channel. We're holding these webinars on the third Wednesday of each month, and like today, each of these webinars will focus on a particular topic where you'll gain some insights from industry leaders that I'm confident will be inspirational, strategic, or thought-provoking, with the primary goal of them giving you, the audience, the gift of their knowledge. Now, I know many of you watching today are familiar with RTCA, but I know we have some first-time visitors with us. So I want to take just a couple of minutes to familiarize you with RTCA and who we are. RTCA is an aviation-centered standards development organization, and our mission is to inspire the creation and the implementation of integrated performance standards that meet the changing global aviation environment and further ensure the safety, security, and the overall health of the aviation ecosystem. Now, in addition to developing standards, we also provide training to government and industry personnel on the application of those standards and how they develop the basis for certification and testing. And on the screen, you can see some of our upcoming training events. Later this month, we have a course on DO-254, Design Assurance Guidelines for Airborne Electronic Hardware. In May, we'll be putting on our Airworthiness Security Certification course, and in June, a course on DO-178C and its supplements. And you can sign up for any of those courses via our website at www.rtca.org. If you're interested or have any questions about our training, our standards development work, or interested in becoming part of the RTCA family of members so that you can have a voice in developing those standards, you can contact us directly through our website or via telephone. Now, our ability to bring you these webinars would not be possible without the generous sponsorships from our industry partners. Today, I'm especially thankful to our gold corporate sponsors for our webinars this year, Collins Aerospace and the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, and also to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association as a corporate sponsor this year, and to Garmin as a webinar sponsor for today's event. Now, we do have some handouts that will be available to you from our sponsors, along with the speaker biographies. And to access those handouts, you can download them by clicking on the handouts button located on the GoToWebinar platform. So let's get started. I'm really pleased about this much featured topic on aviation cybersecurity. Now, this is a topic that RTCA members are very involved with, primarily through our Special Committee 216 on aeronautical system security. And like so many of our special committees, we take an international perspective on developing those standards by working jointly through our partners at EuroK through their working group 72. And while this topic gets a lot of press and stirs up a lot of debate, we're going to be taking just a little bit of a different approach on things today, and view the topic from a certification and international harmonization perspective. After the panelist session, we'll close out the webinar with a short tech talk from Victoria Newhouse, the Deputy Assistant Administrator at the Transportation Security Administration. To get things started, we have a great lineup of specialists on the topic of cybersecurity from both the FAA here in the United States and EASA in Europe, as well as from the industry. Now, on this platform, you're going to be able to submit questions to our panelists, and to do so, you can just click on the comment question mark icon, and then we'll have Karen Hoffman from my staff come online to share some of those questions with our panelists. Our panel today is going to be led by Dr. David Pierce from GE Aviation. He's a 33-year industry veteran on civil and military avionics. Dr. Pierce has been focused on cybersecurity for avionics since 2003 and has experience developing system architectures, product technology roadmaps, and presenting capabilities to customers. Dr. Pierce chairs our RTCA Special Committee SE216 that I mentioned earlier on aeronautical systems security, as well as serving as a member of the FAA Aviation Rulemaking Committee on Aircraft Systems Information Security Protection. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Pierce. Welcome.
Thank you, Terry. I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. We're going to be discussing harmonization of guidance and certification for aviation cybersecurity. We have an experienced and wide-ranging group of panelists today to present topics of interest and also to answer your questions. Next slide, please. We are talking about current guidance and certification work in the aviation cybersecurity community, including the view of small and large industry and regulators from the USA and Europe. We're going to address standards bodies, their interactions, and the documents themselves. We also share an inside look at upcoming document updates to prepare you for what's ahead. The cybersecurity community has many documents and bodies, including the Common Criteria and NIST and others, but we in the aviation realm seek to apply these specifically to our use cases and develop repeatable methods to ensure the security and therefore the safety of aircraft. Our documents are not just limited to civilian aircraft, they've also been referenced and utilized in the defense industry. Our committees have memberships from around the globe, and these efforts have wide-ranging acceptance from industry and regulators alike. Just a reminder that you can ask questions at any time using the comment question mark icon in your control panel. You may indicate the name of panelists you wish to answer the question if you so desire. We'll also post hyperlinks that are on the slides in the chat during the presentation. Next slide, please. I'd like to invite our panelists on camera now, and I'll introduce them. Varun Khanna is a cybersecurity subject matter expert for large transports for the FAA. He is also SE216's designated federal official, now government authorized representative. Siobvan Nyikos is an associate technical fellow in cybersecurity for the Boeing Corporation. Cyrille Rosay is a senior expert in cybersecurity and aviation for EASA. He is also the chair of ESCG and the chair of WG72, 216's European equivalent and our joint committee. Stefan Schwindt is a principal product security leader at GE Aviation, and Mitch Trope is a software engineering team lead for the Airborne Data Link program at Garmin. Next slide, please. This is our agenda for today. We have some facilitator and moderator remarks, which you've already heard, some panelist remarks, which we'll get to in a moment. And following those remarks, we'll have a Q&A with the audience. A reminder that you can ask questions at any time using the question mark icon on the control panel. Under the handouts tab, you can find handouts for corporations that are sponsors, and you can also find full bios for each of the panelists. That may help if you wish to direct your question to a particular person. So next slide, please. We'll start with Siobvan Nyikos. Siobvan, please proceed.
Thank you, Dave. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So in addition to my work at Boeing, I'm active in industry standards for aviation cyber, as well as the AIA Civil Aviation Cyber Subcommittee. So this is a subcommittee under CARS where U.S. aviation stakeholders can collaborate on common problems regarding regulatory oversight, cybersecurity impacts on safety, public perception. Really, this is an important forum for information sharing, ensuring the right people and organizations are involved in rulemaking and standards development, and really coming to an industry position so that we can drive the activity in the right direction. So this subcommittee is divided into two working groups. I chair the Regulatory and Standards Working Group, which does the monitoring, gathering industry positions, and responding to cyber standards and regulatory actions. And then there's also the Working Group 2 for recommendations. And this is a forum for industry to develop recommendations on impacts to cybersecurity on aircraft development, companies, and supply chain. And a lot of this information can be used for standards development. Next slide, please. So we've been very busy over the past year or so. In the Regulatory and Standards Working Group, we've been providing inputs to the EASA draft opinion, which will be discussed later in this presentation. And that's for management of information security risks, or the horizontal rule. We've also been active in the RTCA and EuroCase standards, as well as those from other organizations. And then, of course, standards coordination, and that also will be discussed later, and in particular, ECSCG, and then a new ACI working group for standards coordination. And the recommendations working group has been working on a joint paper between AIA and the Airline Pilot Association, focusing on human factors and pilot concerns as they pertain to cyber, aircraft cybersecurity testing, supply chain security, software security, and then product security change. And these recommendations that the working groups are producing should influence standards developments and the direction where our industry is going. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch Trope from Garmin to share his perspective.
Thanks, Siobvan. Most of the time, when the public thinks about aviation, they envision large airports and airlines. As we all know, the aviation world is much broader than that. Operations like general aviation, business aviation, charter, air cargo, and more are all integral parts of the ecosystem. So too are systems like air traffic control and nav aids that we rely on to ensure each flight is completed safely. Beyond that are a constellation of manufacturers, installers, maintainers, and specialty shops that keep things running smoothly. The risks and threats faced by the owner and pilot of a 4-place piston single are much different than what a major airline sees. A small avionics shop with 10 employees that serves GA aircraft is a far different environment than an MRO with thousands of employees. The rules, guidance, and standards that we develop need to work for organizations of all sizes across our ecosystem. The past decade has been a sea change in how aeronautical information is made available to operators. Instead of hours spent replacing paper charts in binders, tablets update data automatically so they're current. Instead of telephone briefings and flight service station counters, we have up-to-date NEXRAD, METARs, winds aloft, and more available via Flight Information Service, or FIS, throughout the flight to make strategic decisions. To take advantage of these new technologies, we must balance the safety and operational benefits against the risks. During this evaluation, it is essential to make decisions based on the safety continuum. For example, as a general aviation pilot, a tablet can be a large screen to view relevant weather data and do what-if planning to react to changing conditions. On a GA airplane, a wireless link for sending weather data from the flight deck to the tablet may be preferred for its ease of installation and use. On an airliner, though, a wired link may be necessary to do the same thing. The information is no different, but the environment is. An airline may have maintenance standing by to address issues on a 30-minute turn or an overnight. It's extremely rare for that level of service to be present for other types of operations. To obtain a software update, the operator of a GA aircraft must often make a special trip to an avionics shop or service center to have the work done. Some maintenance tasks, like oil changes, may be completed by an owner pilot as preventive maintenance over the course of the year. These very different operational realities need to be considered as we think about requirements for continuing airworthiness or even applying security updates for devices and equipment. New rules, standards, and guidance material for cybersecurity must align with the safety continuum. As these items continue to emerge, we must take great care to not add undue burdens to portions of the ecosystem that can't support them. We can leverage new technologies to find safety benefits and operational efficiencies when we identify and mitigate risks in ways that are appropriate for the wide variety of members of the aviation ecosystem. Next slide, please. Varun?
Hi. So from the FAA's perspective, we essentially kicked off or got interested in cybersecurity in the 2004 timeframe at the launch of the 787. Since we didn't have any rules concerning malicious intent, we decided that we could do it under special conditions. We created 2 special conditions during that process, which were completed around 2007-2008 timeframe, about the time when the RTCA group launched the SC216 activity, as well as WG72. These 2 committees ran concurrently, and it was a sincere desire from both sides to make sure that all the guidance that came out of these 2 committees was harmonized and acceptable to both sides of the pond, including some other regulators too. Transport Canada was involved, as well as Embraer, ANAC, and Japanese regulators have been in and out of the committee. Let's go to the next slide. Let me go through the timeline, and we'll discuss each of the points. Sorry, it's a bit of an eye chart, but we published the special conditions in the 2007-2008 timeframe. We have used it ever since for every new project, as well as every major change. Any systems that were updated to legacy aircraft have used the special conditions. It was time, shortly after this happened, Europe kicked off its horizontal rule effort, and we also kicked off an advisory committee a rulemaking advisory committee to address and help the FAA provide regulatory rule bases. So that ARAC committee was launched around 2014 timeframe. By 2015 or 16, it had completed its work. There were 29 recommendations, and we have started to address those recommendations. Initially, the terms of reference for SC216 was aircraft-centric. Since Europe's huge horizontal rule effort incorporated other areas, including airports, ground infrastructures, air traffic networks, and various other systems, we have changed our TOR to include some of those activities, but not all. The FAA, in general, limited its activity as far as rulemaking was concerned to Part 25 airplanes, large transport airplanes, simply because over the last 15 to 20 years that we've been applying the special conditions, we have only applied them mainly to large transports and Part 25 airplanes. There's been very little, actually only 1 or 2 Part 23 activity and none in rotorcraft. So we started off with the preface that we would actually work Part 25 airplanes first, and then, as the case may be, and we see the need, we would address cybersecurity concerns for rotorcraft, both large and small, as well as Part 23 airplanes. Those parts, because of their exposure and their different flight profiles, seem to have a better seem to, I would say, tend to use the best business practices and the ASTM standards, and they're heading to that side of it rather than to follow the RTCA cybersecurity guidelines. Now, Europe may choose to do it slightly differently, and this is the only difference that we have currently, is that Europe is applying it to all FAR parts, whereas we are only concerning ourselves with Part 25, Part 33, and Part 35, the engine and propeller parts. The rulemaking activity was kicked off last year, and we have completed the first draft of the rule. It hasn't gone out for public comment yet. It is still with our legal AGC group that's going to review it, and then it goes out for public comment in an NPRM later this year or early next year. It's a part of a 12 rule package for Part 25 airplanes, and so it'll be done in that same package environment. The last 4 years were not conducive to rulemaking, and so it was delayed, and we've been actually slightly behind the curve as far as the rulemaking effort is concerned on our side. The rule is essentially going to mimic the European rule EASA has put out, and would probably have the same numbering also. And we intend to have public an NPRM sometime in early January or later this year, with a final rule to be published at the end of 2022 or early 23. And this would be only Part 25, Part 33, and Part 35. The rest of the rulemaking activity, if it does occur, will happen on a case-by-case basis for the various part leaders. In the meantime, the FAA has reorganized a little bit. Aircraft Cert has. We have personnel in place at headquarters. Mr. Will Gonzalez leads our team effort in that, assisted by Wani Tong. On the rotorcraft side, we have Liz Brandley and John Van Hoot. On small airplanes, Part 23, we have Mike Vukas. And in engines and propulsion systems, we have Deepak Kamath as well as Phil Haberlin. On operations side, where we have been fairly active, it's Marcus Labbe from Flight Standards and John Flores from AEG, ably assisted with a lot of personnel that help them out from time to time in keeping airplanes from a cybersecurity perspective in an airworthy state. They set up ANSPs and guide airlines to maintain their airplanes so that there's no issues there. That's about it as far as the FAA activity is concerned. We are still going forward. We are undergoing some serious training programs that will help train both our workforce and the DER workforce, and hopefully we should meet the challenges that cybersecurity brings to us in the future. Thank you. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Varun. Cyrille Rosay speaking. I'm from the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. I will just have two short slides about one on EASA cyber regulation, which is twofold. One on the product, as Varun mentioned before. So we are, yes, a bit wider. We cover aircraft in general, including rotorcraft. Engine and APUs for the product, and after that we have what we call the horizontal rule, part IS for information security, that will in fact look at organizations information security, so basically to implement information security management system for airlines, navigation service providers. You should have been some three dots after that, because it's also aerodromes, maintenance organization, design organization. In fact, any organization that is involved in aviation and that may also introduce a safety, that may have a safety impact on the aircraft. So for product, of course, we started all in parallel also with the FAA. We started with special conditions for the A380 initially, then the A350, and we had several iterations of the special condition. Basically, it was very similar to the one that the FAA has published, except that we put it all together in one document. But we covered also both aspects that were covered by the FAA special conditions. And after that, we also were participating to the ARAC working group that in 2016 published their recommendation to the FAA. And because we had already quite well harmonized after 1 year of discussions with industry and regulators, we took the text of the recommendation to the FAA and we put it into our NPA. After that, of course, you have always a commented period, and you have also some modifications. So the result at the end is a bit slightly different from what was initially in the ARAC working group report, but the intent and the spirit is there. So the NPA was published in 2019, and the decision to publish the rule was in 2020. It's called ED Decision 2020-006R, and with a date of application for 1st of January this year. So since 1st of January this year, for large aircraft, also general aviation, but I will quickly talk about that. We have also, of course, we take care about the safety continuum. We don't have the same stringent requirement for large aircraft and for general aviation. For rotorcraft, CS29 and CS27, so it's applicable for new product. For legacy product, of course, then we continue with special conditions. And when you have a major mode that is implemented on a legacy product, but we ask the applicant to elect to comply to the new rule, because basically it's a translation of the special condition into the regulation. So concerning organization, it will be more detailed later. We have a platform which is the European strategic coordination platform. So where we have almost all the stakeholders, aviation stakeholders in it, and together we are working on an opinion, which is an EASA opinion. Means that we will give our opinion to the Commission. It will go after that to the Parliament. It's something that is much more complex because it will be a European rule. It will not be a certification specification like for products. So the process is a bit more, is a bit heavier. And this is why we try to have all of the organization in the loop from the beginning. And of course, so it will be basically a very high level, as much as possible, a high level, objective-based regulation. The detail will be more in acceptable means of compliance and guidance material. And we will rely, of course, as much as we can on existing industry standards. And that's where it comes for us. It's very important for us to have a mature industry standard that can cover the regulation, because so the standards are something that is very important, because it's something that is mainly developed by the industry for the industry, and they provide something that is already accepted, tested in general. So for us, it's more important to give the objective. So why do we want the organization to do some specific activities, and after that the details on how they do it, it's in the standards. So next slide, please. So about the standards, so we have in fact two things. I will quickly talk about Working Group 72, Eurocare Working Group 72, which is the sister organization of SC216. We are working on the same standard, and we are developing standard for airworthiness information security. for aircraft, but also for other working groups. And so we need also to coordinate with these other working groups. One means to coordinate is what we call the ECSCG, which is European Cybersecurity Standards Coordination Group. It's something that was that is financed by the European Commission. And the role of this coordination group is really to prevent duplication of standards, so that we don't spend too much time on developing things that already exist. So this is why the first activity is to assess, to explore, and to identify all existing standards on the dedicated topic, and eventually to identify where we have some gaps. And where we need to develop or to ask to develop some new standards, some new materials, sorry. Yes, and also we have to check that the standards, existing standards, are really fit for purpose, and they are really working for the regulation that is being under development. This is one of the main requirements from the European Commission. So we have in the ECSCG, we have a membership that include, in fact, the regulator, but also industry that are represented by their associations, and also international standard development organization, like we have EuroCAE, we have SIA, and Sensenelec. We have these different existing standard development organizations. On the link that we can, I think, copy to the chat is a link to the rolling development plan. This rolling development plan is basically a table of existing standards for cybersecurity in aviation, or existing standards for cybersecurity that could be used for in aviation. So the ECSCG is part of what we call a triad of a coordination group. One is for ATM standards. It's called the EASCG. So we have the same link. In fact, it's eascg.eu. You have the EU SCG for unmanned airborne system, and ECSCG for the cyber. And one important thing is also that even these three groups are coordinating together to avoid that, for example, one group of people working on unmanned vehicle develop a standard on cybersecurity when in fact they could directly use something that had been developed for other products that just need some adaptation. So I think that's all. So you can go to the next slide.
So then it's my turn to close the loop. So I mean, as we know, aviation is quite a global activity, global business. And so unsurprisingly, there's also a European organization which mirrors what Siobvan was talking about with AIA. So in Europe, you have ASD, the Aerospace and Defense Industries Association of Europe, which whose members are the national associations of each of the European countries, as well as some direct members of aviation companies. And they cover what's commonly referred to as a manufacturing sector. So the design and production of aircraft and aviation ground systems. ASD collaborates with the other organizations, so primarily AIA, as we heard earlier, but also with all the other industry organizations that fall under the ICC AIA umbrella that represent the manufacturing sector across the globe. ASD also works with the other aviation industry stakeholder groups that represent other sectors. So we've got relationships with ACI, which is a stakeholder group for airports, CANSO, which is a stakeholder group for the air traffic management area, and A4E for airlines, as well as actually IATA, but mainly from a European aspect, A4E. And so within ASD, there's the Civil Aviation Cybersecurity Task Force. And one of the main activities of the Cybersecurity Task Force is to form the European manufacturing sector opinion on aviation cybersecurity. So we have the various subject matter experts from the ASD members to discuss what are the activities going on in regulation and standardization in any other areas to try to identify what needs need to be addressed and to work on that. As part of the work of the Cybersecurity Task Force, ASD engages with the regulatory bodies, so that's mainly EASA and the European Commission, and supports the different European initiatives such as ECSCG, which Cyrille just mentioned, and the ESCP, which I will get to in the next slide. But it also supports the international activities within ICAO as part of the ICC-AIA umbrella. So next slide, please. So the European Strategic Coordination Platform is quite an important aspect for the European rulemaking. So Cyrille had hinted on the organizational security rule that is in work with EASA. So that's quite an ambitious project to have a rule that every organization involved in aviation will need to have cybersecurity to protect it at the organizational level and not just the aircraft product that we've seen with the current standards that Varun and Cyrille mentioned as part of the special conditions. So that's quite a challenge, is how do you find requirements that cover all the organizations and address all the sectorial needs? Because aviation is quite special. We've got, depending which sector you're looking at, there's different constraints that we face. So in order to be able to find a way of finding something that's fair on industry, so that the rules are appropriate, that they're not too strict or impossible to reach, but also that they address the needs that we have as society. The idea of the European Strategic Coordination Platform was set up, where we gather all the different stakeholders to discuss what would be acceptable regulatory material, where regulatory material is the rules, the guidance material, and acceptable means of compliance associated with it. So this stakeholder group in the ESCP contains the regulatory bodies, so EASA and various parts of the European Commission. It has the industry stakeholder organizations such as ASD, CANSO, ACI, Airlines for Europe, but also has international observers because we are a global community, so these things do need to have harmonization. So as the international observers, we do have FAA, we have Transport Canada, NATO, AIA, to name some of them. And so that's really the platform where we're trying to identify those rules, identify what are the standards that we need, which ties into the ECSCG, is trying to coordinate that we're able to engage with the standards organizations such as RTCA and EUROCAE to be able to provide the material that we need so that we can advance as aviation into the future and make sure that we advance in a secure manner. So now I'll hand it back to Dave.
Okay, thank you to each of you. A reminder that you could ask questions at any point by going to that question mark icon in the control panel, and feel free to designate a panelist if you so desire for the question. I believe that we're going to move back to the beginning so that you can see the panelists again. Back to the first slide, yep. And Karen Hoffman, our program director, do you have questions for us, Karen?
Yes, I do, and it seems like the regulatory individuals are the popular questions today. The first one, and I guess it would be both a FAA and EASA question, is how do you apply RTCA/EUROCAE documents to ETSOs and/or TSOs?
Cyrille, you want to take that first, or you want me to do it?
I can, because in fact we implemented something with the EC decision 2020-006R. I did something also to the CSCTSO. So basically we said that we proposed the system supplier to develop their system, providing with a SAL as defined in EDIT 203A or DO 356A. In fact, just to ease after that the process when the system is installed on a product. So the applicant then can take credit from the security measures that are implemented by the supplier.
So I was going to say that from our side, we have already accepted the RTCA guidance material as a means of compliance to the special conditions. You can choose that, or you can use the positions that are outlined in the special conditions as a means of compliance. Either or is okay. We're in the process of writing an AC, which invokes the current 3 documents, 326A, 355A, and 356A, as a means of compliance for Part 25 airplanes. For other parts, the other experts can allude to that, but this has only been a Part 25 effort for us, essentially. As we add other documents to the RTCA or SC 216 publishes newer documents, we will then decide whether those are applicable to the US side and that whether they would be acceptable means for the domain that they're going to address. So the newer documents that are going to address ground systems and air traffic networks and various other things, those documents will be either approved and modified in the AC, or specifically portions of it may be excluded, and that would be written up in the AC itself. So either we accept the document as is, or we modify it and we put our position in the AC, or we do not recognize it. So those are the various options that we have. But typically, since they are industry consensus documents and other regulatory bodies have had their input in it, we rather have a very harmonized approach. And in general, we have been accepting most of the output, at least in the cybersecurity world, we've accepted all 3 as a means of compliance.
Thank you. The next question, is there any new cybersecurity guidance on MODs, STCs, and ATC? And again, I think it's probably more towards the regulatory folks, but open to anyone?
So I was from the STC side, yes. I mean, we treat STCs from the perspective of what risk do they bring to the airplane. So if you have a STC that is writing to the aircraft control domain or the aircraft information domain, then we want to make sure that you have adequate mitigations in place to prevent issues from interfering with the aircraft control domain. And we look at each STC on a case-by-case basis, and we apply the issue papers as necessary. So and now there is a move to address this as from a TSO perspective also. So we are actually working that aspect of it also. That's from the STC perspective. Cyrille, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, so for STCs and for modification in general, what is important, we found that there were an important point to clarify is when is change or STC, I mean, considered as major change. And for that, with the decision 2020-006R, we also modified part 21, in particular part 21A91, the guidance material for definition, I mean, of when is a change major or minor. And we implemented also criteria that are related to information security. And basically, it's what you mentioned, Varun. It's when a system is talking to something that is in a domain that should be more controlled. For example, if you have a system that is talking to something which is in aircraft control domain. We consider that's a major change. We want to have a look at it. So I don't want to go too much into detail, but you can have a look on the guidance material to part 21A91, and you will have the details of the criteria.
And to add to the previous responses is DO 356A or ED 203A has some guidance on how to address supplemental type certificates. So the discussion that you're just hearing is in more detail in the document on how to assess if your supplemental type certificate, the change that you're making is going to have a impact that you need to secure against and how you can handle it in different situations. And I think also a valid point to raise with the question about how do these standards get adopted into rules is, as industry, we work in partnership with the authorities. So while of course, as Varun had mentioned, is the advisory circulars can remove bits from our standards if they think it's not suitable, is we're writing these standards to help ourselves as an industry, especially with the rulemaking. Since we know what the rules are, what's anticipated, is we try to write something that will be acceptable, that when we achieve industry consensus, that's also acceptable to the authorities. And the FAA and EASA take part in the meetings as observers, so we actually have that dialogue. So we try to achieve it that through RTCA and EuroK, we have documents that will help in rulemaking and that the authorities do not have any difficulties in adopting as part of their acceptable means of compliance.
I also want to point out that from an operations perspective, we have 355A, and we have AC's orders and notices covering that that our flight standards organization has put out, and we use those from managing the day-to-day work that ensures that the airplane remains in an airworthy state from a security perspective.
Varun, slight follow-up on, you mentioned ACs being out. When do you expect to have the ACs that will specifically call out the 326 alpha, 355 alpha, and 356 alpha?
So the typical practice for ACs now is that it comes out with the rule. So as soon as the rule is published, the AC will be published with it concurrently. We have actually, from a technical perspective, my team and I have already completed the AC. It is currently with legal, going through its legal gyrations, and then it will go out along with the rule. It will go out for public comment also. So, and concurrently, I mean, right at the moment, we are invoking the 3 documents. And downstream, we expect a revision to the AC to add other documents or other means of compliance that may become appropriate as we see fit. So from a calendar perspective, the NPRM should go out end of this year, early next year for the rule and the AC. And the rule and the AC should be final by the end of 2022 or early 2023. In the meantime, these documents are an acceptable means to meet the special conditions.
Thank you. Next question. As industry and certification organizations, how do you see aircraft system design guidance, certification, and ground system standards, network certification evolving together? Work at ICAO, like the TSFG, is working to look at how and where these come together.
Who do you want that?
Well, it's not directed to anyone in particular. We'd like to take a stab at it.
Would you repeat that question, please?
Okay. As industry and certification organizations, how do you see aircraft system design guidance / certification and ground system standards / network certification evolving together?
Can I?
Yes, please.
I mean, they are working together. So RTCA and the OK, we're working also on standard for certification of ground systems with taking into account the cybersecurity aspects. And we have already a standard, which is ED205. We are changing it, so it will be ED205A very soon. And with this update of ED205A, you will have also an RTCA equivalent document for ground systems. So the coordination is done that in a way that we want to be able. We don't have to do exactly the same thing, because of course it's two different worlds, but we just want also to be able to share and to compare the risk. So we put the tools and mechanisms for at the end to be able to ensure that the ground system and airborne system providing functions that are, let's say, a certain safety requirement is after that you have the appropriate level of security protection or mitigation on both system, on the ground and on the aircraft. So this is done through another standard, which is ED201, which is a bit the cover standard that makes all the underneath standard working together and be able to be compared for that purpose.
Thank you. Another question. There is often a clash between reasonable security and excessive security related to the cost to the business. That's where we get our industry partners to speak out. There's also a bit of overlap between safety and security. Safety requirements must be addressed, but security is often more of how much. Please comment.
So I've always maintained that security must bring value to the airplane. We shouldn't have security for the sake of security. We should have it because it actually does something specific to help safety do its task. The key task for me, at least, and some of my colleagues might disagree with me, but the key task for security is to ensure that safety performs its function. Security is a protective measure for me. Safety is the key measure that actually flies the airplane and performs safe flight and landing. So from that perspective, everything that we do must have value associated with it. In the past, we have done things like, for example, the special conditions asked for data to be logged. However, we did not specify at that point in time what we would do with that data. What would we do with the log files? Simply logging the data was not good enough. You had to have tools and analysis tools to evaluate those log files to ensure that there wasn't anything lurking forensically with those files. So therefore, it has to bring value to it. If it doesn't bring value, it shouldn't be brought on. Having said that, we find that the general trends in industry are there to facilitate and make easy the life of the pilot so that we can use PEDs and we can use tablets and we can use cell phone devices. And all of these devices are essentially uncontrolled from an aviation environment, but yet they are going to be sending data to the aircraft control domain or the airplane information domain, or even the maintenance aspects. And so that has to be, we have to ensure that none of that has any disastrous effects as far as safety is concerned and does not interfere with normal performance. So I completely agree with the question that it has to bring value to it. And we must always keep that in mind. Simply having security for the sake of security would not be appropriate.
Yes, this is Siobvan. This question is very timely because we're having some of the same discussions during the efforts toward the AIA ALPA recommendations paper. Because there are desires for crew alerting and additional security measures and additional situational awareness. But like Varun said, we don't want to do security for the sake of security. We want to make sure that, you know, we're focusing on safety. We're focusing on, okay, well, is there a benefit to what we're doing? And specifically in the case of crew alerting, whatever information we give to the pilot must be actionable, must be usable. And we do have to balance between, you know, new features on the airplane and security. And if we're adding security, you know, are we still balancing the human factors aspect of that? So we are definitely actively working that piece.
I would also add, this isn't necessarily a new issue, just in the safety domain as well. It's easy to keep adding things and think you're including additional safety margin when it's not actually worth all the extra work you're doing. It's just that for many safety aspects, we're a very mature industry, and we have developed a very detailed understanding of what's necessary for the various physical properties of the airplane. Whereas from the security standpoint, it's still relatively new, and we are still very much learning as an industry. But I'm extremely confident that muscle will get developed fairly quickly, and we will understand kind of how much is enough and how to gauge that when we keep adding features to the airplane, how to strike those balances between usability, security, maintainability, and safety.
And we can't forget as well that we're writing industry consensus standards and using that. And I mean, this is coming from industry, so excessive security is something that we should be avoiding, because I mean, it is our bottom line at the end, is that we're trying to find that balance. This is also why it's important to have as many members taking part in the industry activities, is that we can actually get that picture, to have that feeling is, are we doing the right levels? Because if we do too little, we failed in terms of safety. If we do too much, we failed our companies because we make aviation not affordable. And it's really getting that balance right, which is important, why such industry-led activities are so important.
Thank you. Further, any more?
Oh yeah, we got a few more. I'm trying to, a lot of them are very similar, such as looking ahead, the cybersecurity objectives modulated for low risk systems, or will airworthiness security objectives need to be satisfied consistently across the spectrum of operational risk, operational risk domain? Kind of along the same lines as far as safety, security, but you don't need me to read it again?
Yeah.
No, if I may, I would like maybe to also to introduce something that is also make a link with the previous questions. If you want to know when you do enough, of course it's difficult. This is why we propose in the horizontal rule to do that through, in fact, using a security risk assessment. So you also have to assess your security, looking at the safety effect at the end, and you do a security risk assessment, and at some point you decide when you accept the residual risk. So through this exercise, normally you should know when you do enough for the to protect the assets you need to protect. A bit similar to what you do when you do, in fact, a safety risk assessment, but this time it's for looking at security properties.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left here, so I want to answer a question. We've had several questions, kind of the new entrants. Are there any cybersecurity rules or standards either currently existing or planned for unmanned aircraft?
And I know that SC 216 has not addressed that issue. I know there are some other committees that are working on it. Varun, please go ahead if you.
Yes, you're right. There are other committees that are currently working on it. David Chen from the FAA is one of the key focals for that out of headquarters, out of Washington, D.C., I believe. But it's not been our domain. We have been actually large transport centric, along with possibly others, but currently our effort has mainly been large transport. So I can't really answer to what activity is going on. I know there is activity going on the UAS side and on the unmanned side, but I can't give you a status on that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
On the EASA regulation side, we have it's a prototype of a rule. It's a rule in the future. It's called the special condition for US that is under development. In it, we look at only. So we will implement the security aspects, yes, but for the certified categories. You know that you have three categories, and only the certified so far is foreseen to be required to implement security measures.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys, ladies and gentlemen. Now we're handing it back over to Terry, so we can go ahead.
I'd also like to thank the panelists for their expertise and their time in preparing for this and offering themselves up for it. Much appreciation.
Thank you to all. Appreciate it.
And thanks, David, and to our panelists. A really good discussion, very informative. And I know there's probably a lot of questions that did not get answered. We capture all of those, and we will follow up with those of you that have asked questions and get some answers for you after the webinar is over. I want to take a moment here again to thank all of our sponsors for today's event. Even during these very difficult times, these organizations have been gracious enough to make today's webinar series happen. So again, my thanks to Collins Aerospace, NATCA, Garmin, and AOPA as sponsors for today's webinar. Your continued support to the industry and to RTCA is very much appreciated. One of the government organizations that's very supportive and is very active in our work here at RTCA is the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA. They're a contributing member to our advisory board and participate in a number of our special committees. And I'm pleased to have with us today Ms. Victoria Newhouse from the TSA to close out our webinar with a tech talk. Victoria serves as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the TSA Office on Policy Plans and Engagement. She has a tremendous background in aviation and security. She has executive responsibility for developing and implementing effective and efficient risk-reducing security regulations and requirements to protect transportation and the transportation infrastructure, both domestically and internationally. And this oversight goes beyond just the airlines, airports, general aviation, air cargo, but it also includes mass transit, passenger rail, freight rail, pipelines, and highway and motor carriers. And on behalf of the TSA administrator, she also serves as the executive sponsor of the Aviation Security Advisory Committee. So Victoria, welcome. I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Captain. Appreciate it. And thank you very much to RTCA, all of your members, all of our previous panelists as well. Many of you may be quite familiar with the TSA's work, but I'd like to just give you a quick overview of some of the things that TSA in particular we've been doing, particularly in this COVID-19 environment over the past, I will say, 14 months, both domestically and internationally. And I'll give you one very stark statistic. On April 14th, 2020, we screened approximately 87,000 passengers at our TSA checkpoints nationwide. Prior to that, in 2019, we were seeing daily highs of over 2.5 and 2.6 million passengers a day. So that is just a tremendous steep, I don't know, cliff dive of passenger flow right at when COVID-19 coronavirus was heating up a number of presidential executive orders. Since then, we've implemented, we have not just called it recovery, it's actually being resilient and taking the opportunities that we can to learn from these opportunities, learn from the situation we've been handed, and also take some opportunities to try new things. For instance, with many of you, particularly airframe manufacturers, OEMs, equipment, security equipment and even non-traditional providers, such as people who make acrylic shield barriers you see at our airport checkpoints. We were able to test a number of options and work with our international partners as well. RTCA is a world-renowned standard setting organization. As Terry mentioned, my office, we set security regulations or standards. And we faced a new challenge in how to meet our very high security outcomes without diminishing security, but being as flexible as possible, both operationally, working with our stakeholders, our airlines, our airports, our transportation operators, both domestically and internationally that serve the United States, and trying to figure out ways to make it work, making it cost effective, looking at resources. So we were able to do a number of things that we started out in partnership. That has really been the basis, being transparent, and to be good partners, we had to be transparent. So we bring a number of people and continue to do that, bring a number of individuals, experts to the table, both our domestic experts and international experts. And we've looked at a number of things, and we started out with what we called a small campaign back last June. Administrator David Pekoski, who's now our acting Deputy Secretary for Homeland Security, started out with a campaign called Stay Healthy, Stay Secure. What can you expect when you show up at a US airport? How is air travel going to change? And so we looked at a number of ways, things we were already doing, such as making sure that when you present identification, we did simple things, looking at that equipment, turning it around. So it's more self-service. The equipment for your hand baggage at our checkpoints is actually screened with 3D computed tomography. The things you see in medical settings, we've actually translated that with a lot of help from the OEMs and our partners to make that less touching of individuals. They're things, the things I put on the belt every day when I travel. Also, too, enhanced automated imaging technology, the body scanners, making sure that, again, enhancing that technology, using the opportunities to see how we can take this technology and procedures to a next level to make it resilience. I've told a lot of people this, and we say this quite a bit, is we're not looking back. This is looking forward. So with our partners, I can just give you a little bit about my office alone. We have not only a domestic presence, but we do have individuals. I have a small team of about 20 individuals who are seated both here in the US and around the globe, who work directly with airlines that are either domestic airlines who service international routes or international airlines around the world. And we worked with countless airlines to repatriate, for instance, over 100,000 Americans back to the US within the scope of a month, working with our great partners at the FAA and the State Department and Department of Defense to get these people back on US soil safely in the midst of a heating up pandemic. Also assisted very closely and enabled, from a security standpoint, repatriation of tens of thousands of foreign citizens, a lot of goods and services, facilitating cargo, making sure that the global supply chain continued with some adjustments. You can look at our website, we're pretty open. We actually publish numbers of individuals we screen every day, but also the things that we've done to make our environment more safe for that traveler. Internationally, though, I think there's another opportunity to explain that TSA also works with our foreign government partners. We are active, highly active in ICAO. My office, we have a team of experts who are actually seated up in Montreal, but also too here in the US to work with ICAO on setting standards. Many of you may be familiar with UN Security Council Resolution 2309, passed in late 2016, that focuses more on aviation security and countering terrorist activity in the aviation domain. And we've been very active in taking some of the lessons we've learned within this COVID environment and trying to interject that in the working groups. Captain McManus mentioned the fact that we do have an advisory committee, Aviation Security Advisory Committee, looking at different health aspects, introducing them to our CDC colleagues, working with them on things like the most recent, the mask mandates in transportation, to understand what the ramifications are, how to deploy it, what are the questions, making sure we keep our employees at our checkpoints, our flying air marshals, safe, along with all of your employees, particularly for our airline and airport partners and our law enforcement partners who support. So there have been a number of opportunities there that we'd be happy to work with any of you if you have any questions offline working through RTCA to give you a little bit more about that. But I encourage you to go to tsa.gov. We have a coronavirus or COVID-19 website that has a number of things on there number of publicly available resources. Also, too, the partnerships, and it's not lost on us. I know David just talked about roadmaps in cyber, for instance. TSA has never taken our eye off the ball with respect to security. And over the past 3 years, we've implemented a very effective, what we think is an effective TSA strategy, strategic documents. It didn't really exist prior to that time. A capital investment plan, looking at ways we can actually improving our approach to security, committing to our people, accelerating the action, like I talked about, deploying new technologies, new processes, better training, hiring of all those types of things. So looking at that, looking at elements like cyber and insider remain at the forefront of our security mission. And right in our window here, we want to make sure we continue with that. So we've been public in trying to collaborate with our industry stakeholders to obtain inputs. How do we protect our cyber infrastructure from a security standpoint with respect to transportation security? How do we actually combat the insider threat? Our advisory committee actually, sua sponte, on their own, they actually published and presented to our administrator a paper on combating and keeping our focus on insider threat during COVID, making sure that we don't have any lapses in security, just doing it a little differently. And being flexible really is the bottom line, is the communication, both domestically and internationally. We've learned a lot from our partners. We do a lot with what we call capacity development. We have a small team of people in my office who go abroad, for instance, and work with foreign governments and foreign airport operators to deploy and implement new technologies. We actually help fund it with a lot of State Department dollars. So there's a lot of opportunities out there that I'm very proud to say that the TSA, we've been able to do our very best to support our own workforce, global commerce, transportation, and particularly transportation security within this sphere. We call it the ecosystem of transportation. So thanks to all of you for your continued support, understanding, and partnership. We greatly appreciate it. Thanks very much for the opportunity today, and I look forward to speaking with some of you in the future.
Well, great. Thank you, Victoria. Really great insight and some wonderful information. Appreciate it. Well, this concludes today's webinar. My sincere appreciation to Dr. David Pierce and to our panelists, Varun Khanna from the FAA, Siobvan Nyikos from Boeing, Cyrille Rosay from EASA, Stefan Schwindt from GE Aviation, and Mitchell Trope from Garmin. And again, my thanks to Victoria Newhouse from the TSA. Thank you for all of your valuable participation this afternoon. And again, thank you to our sponsors for today's webinar, Collins Aerospace, National Air Traffic Controllers Association, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and Garmin. And for the audience, thank you for joining us today. I hope you found today's presentations educational, inspiring, and evolving. And again, these webinars are being recorded, so if you want to review anything presented today or any of our past webinars, you can do so by going to the RTCA YouTube channel. I hope you'll be able to all join us for our next webinar, which is going to be held on Wednesday, May 19th, again at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Our topic for next month is human factors in design and certification. We have a fantastic panel discussion plan with representatives from Collins Aerospace, Honeywell, Applied Ergonomics, Boeing, and the FAA. And for our Tech Talk next month, we'll be joined by United Airlines Captain Bob Fox, who serves as the first Vice President and National Safety Coordinator of the Airline Pilots Association International. He'll be sharing his perspectives as a line pilot who flies today's transport category aircraft, and we'll discuss the important foundational elements that pilots need in order to maintain the highest level of safe airline transportation. Again, thanks for being with us today, and have a great day.